My name is Elliot Grayson, and I've spent the better part of my life climbing the ladder at Hawthorne Enterprises. You might think that sounds impressive. Hell, it should sound impressive. But let me tell you something about ladders. They're slippery as hell when someone above you decides to kick them out from under your feet. I sat in my corner office on the 45th floor of the Hawthorne Tower, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The city buzzed below me like a hive of ants, oblivious to the storm brewing inside these glass walls. For over a decade, I'd been the guy who got things done, the one Margaret Hawthorne trusted implicitly. She wasn't just my boss. She was my mentor, my confidant, maybe even a friend if I'm being honest. But now she was gone, dead, and with her went the last shred of stability this company had left. Her daughter, Victoria, was coming back from Europe to take over. Everyone talked about how brilliant she was, how she'd studied business at Oxford, how she'd worked for some startup in Berlin. But none of that mattered to me. What mattered was this. She didn't know me. She didn't understand what made this company tick, or more importantly, what made me tick. And that ignorance? It would be her downfall. I remember the first time Margaret called me into her office. I was fresh off a promotion, still green enough to believe hard work alone could get me anywhere. She leaned back in her chair, cigarette smoke curling around her like a veil, and said, "Elliot, you're smart. Too smart to waste your talents playing by the rules." Back then, I thought she was complimenting me. Now I realize she was warning me. Margaret taught me everything. How to navigate the boardroom politics, how to read people better than they read themselves, and most importantly, how to keep secrets. Secrets were her currency, and she made sure I knew where all the skeletons were buried. When she passed away 6 months ago, everyone assumed it was natural causes. Heart attack, they said, but I knew better. There was too much unfinished business swirling around her death, too many unanswered questions. And now Victoria was stepping into her shoes without a clue about any of it. Part of me felt sorry for her. Another part? Well, let's just say I wasn't exactly mourning the loss of Margaret's guiding hand anymore. Victoria strode into the conference room like she owned the place, which, technically, she did. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, her tailored navy suit screamed confidence, and her entourage of consultants trailed behind her like loyal puppies. If I hadn't hated her already, I might have been impressed. She stood at the head of the table, scanning each face with an intensity that bordered on arrogance. "Change," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "is inevitable. And if we want Hawthorne Enterprises to survive, we need to adapt." I raised an eyebrow but kept my mouth shut. Adaptation sounded great in theory, but not when it came from someone who'd spent the last 5 years sipping espresso in Berlin cafes while I bled for this company. Still, I listened politely as she outlined her plan. Cost-cutting measures, department restructuring, and, of course, a full audit of every division, including mine. By the time the meeting ended, I could feel the weight of her gaze lingering on me. It wasn't curiosity or respect. It was suspicion, and I knew right then that she saw me as a problem to solve. The next day, Victoria called another meeting. This time, it was just the executive team. No consultants, no distractions, just a shark circling the water, waiting for blood. When it was my turn to present, I walked up to the screen and started going through my quarterly report. Numbers don't lie, and mine told a story of steady growth despite the economic downturn. But before I could finish, Victoria interrupted. "These discrepancies," she said, pointing to a line item I hadn't noticed earlier, "explain why our margins are shrinking. Care to elaborate, Mr. Grayson?" My stomach dropped. Someone had tampered with my report. I glanced around the room, searching for signs of betrayal, but all I saw were smug expressions. They smelled blood in the water. "I'll look into it," I said calmly, though my pulse raced. "No need," Victoria replied, her tone icy. "You're fired." Just like that, my world crumbled. I packed my things in silence, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. As I stepped onto the elevator, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what I still controlled. That night, I poured myself a glass of scotch and stared at the city lights from my penthouse window. Fired by a spoiled brat who didn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a cocktail napkin. Oh, Victoria, you shouldn't have done that. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure server, one only Margaret and I had access to. Inside were files detailing every dirty secret Hawthorne Enterprises had ever tried to bury: offshore accounts, bribes, blackmail, and worse. These weren't just tools of leverage. They were weapons. First, I leaked a memo detailing Victoria's plans to cut employee benefits. Within hours, social media exploded with outrage. Then I tipped off a journalist about a pending lawsuit involving one of our suppliers. Stock prices plummeted overnight. As I watched the chaos unfold, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Was this revenge worth it? Probably not. But damn if it didn't feel good. The next morning, I woke up to news alerts flashing across my phone. Hawthorne Enterprises under fire, read one headline. Another accused Victoria of incompetence. My lips curled into a smirk as I scrolled through the articles. Let her try to clean up this mess. But as the days passed, guilt began creeping in. Employees were losing jobs. Clients were pulling out. The company Margaret had built was crumbling, and I was partly responsible. Still, I couldn't stop. Every email I sent, every phone call I made, pushed Victoria closer to the edge. One evening, as I sat in my darkened living room, I received a text from an unknown number. "Stop playing games, Elliot. You're not the only one with secrets." I froze. Whoever this was, they knew something I didn't. And suddenly, I realized this game of cat and mouse was far from over. I stared at the text message for what felt like an eternity. The words burned into my brain, mocking me. "You're not the only one with secrets." Who was this? And how did they know enough to threaten me? I poured myself another drink, my third that night, and tried to calm the storm brewing in my chest. Secrets were my currency, my armor, my weapon. I'd spent years collecting them, hoarding them like treasure, but now it seemed someone else had been digging too. Someone dangerous. The memory of Margaret's final days flickered through my mind. She'd been distant, withdrawn, her usual confidence replaced by something darker. Fear, maybe. At the time, I chalked it up to stress or illness. Now I wasn't so sure. Had she known something was coming? Was that why she'd started giving me access to those hidden files? Whatever the truth was, I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Victoria was already circling the drain, and if I want to survive this mess, I needed to stay 2 steps ahead. Still, as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. That someone or something was watching me. By week 2 of Victoria's reign, Hawthorne Enterprises looked less like a Fortune 500 company and more like a sinking ship. Layoffs hit hard, morale plummeted, and key clients began jumping ship faster than rats abandoning a burning vessel. Every decision she made seemed designed to alienate everyone around her, including her own board of directors. Meanwhile, I kept pushing buttons from the shadows. I leaked emails showing Victoria's incompetence to major shareholders. I whispered rumors to disgruntled employees, turning them against her. Hell, I even tipped off the IRS about some questionable tax filings. Not enough to destroy the company outright, but enough to keep her distracted while I figured out my next move. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was survival. If Victoria succeeded in dismantling everything Margaret had built, then all my sacrifices over the years would have been for nothing. This wasn't just her legacy, it was mine too. But as satisfying as it was to watch her stumble, I couldn't ignore the growing unease gnawing at me. Each move I made brought us closer to collapse. And when the dust settled, there might not be anything left to salvage. Victoria started showing up to work looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her once immaculate suits were wrinkled, her hair pulled back into messy ponytails. She carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere, scribbling furiously whenever someone spoke to her. It didn't take a genius to figure out she was unraveling. One afternoon, I ran into her in the lobby of the building. A coincidence, or so I thought. She glanced up from her phone, startled, and our eyes locked for a moment longer than necessary. "Elliot," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "Just grabbing coffee." I lied smoothly, holding up my cup. Thought I'd see how things were going. Her jaw tightened. Things would be going better, if certain people stopped trying to sabotage me. I raised an eyebrow. Sabotage? Sounds serious. You should probably look into that. She studied me for a beat, searching for cracks in my facade. But I'd spent decades perfecting my poker face. Finally, she muttered something under her breath and stormed off, leaving me standing there with a smirk tugging at the corners of my mouth. As I watched her go, though, I noticed something odd, a man in a dark coat following her at a distance. He was good, too good, but I'd spent enough time dodging shadows to recognize one when I saw it. Whoever he wasn't working for Victoria, which meant someone else was playing this game. Later that night, I received another message from the unknown number. Meet me at Pier 42. Midnight. Come alone. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the reckless, self-destructive part, wanted answers. So at 11:50 p.m., I found myself walking down the deserted pier, the sound of waves lapping against the wooden planks echoing in the cold night air. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by a hood. For a split second, I considered turning around. Then he spoke. You've been busy, Elliot. His voice was low, gravelly, familiar somehow. Who are you? I demanded, keeping my tone steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. He stepped closer, lowering his hood. My stomach dropped. It was Marcus Kane, a former associate of Margaret's who'd vanished after her death. Rumor had it he'd fled the country to avoid prosecution. Clearly, those rumors were wrong. I'm the guy who knows what really happened to Margaret, he said, his lips curling into a grim smile. And I think it's time we had a little chat. Marcus led me to an abandoned warehouse near the pier, its interior lit only by the faint glow of moonlight streaming through broken windows. We sat across from each other at a rickety table, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. She didn't die of natural causes, Marcus said bluntly. Someone poisoned her. My heart skipped a beat. Who? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. But let's start with what you know. Those files you've been using to tear Victoria apart, they're just the tip of the iceberg. Margaret was onto something big before she died. Something that could bring down the entire Hawthorne empire. I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. Margaret hadn't trusted anyone, not completely. Not even me. If she'd uncovered something that dangerous, she wouldn't have left it lying around for anyone to find. Unless, where are the rest of the files? I asked. Marcus smirked. That's where you come in. Together, we can finish what Margaret started. But first, you need to decide whose side you're really on. I left the warehouse with more questions than answers. Marcus's words replayed in my head like a broken record. Finish what Margaret started. What the hell did that mean? And why did it feel like I was being manipulated again? Back at my apartment, I pored over the files I'd salvaged from Margaret's private server. Most of them were financial records, incriminating documents tying various executives to illegal activities. But buried deep within the archives was something I hadn't noticed before, a series of encrypted audio files labeled Project Phoenix. I spent hours trying to crack the encryption, my frustration mounting with each failed attempt. By dawn, I still hadn't succeeded, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Project Phoenix was, it was worth killing for. As the sun rose over Manhattan, I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep playing Victoria's game, dragging her deeper into the abyss until there was nothing left. Or I could team up with Marcus and uncover the truth, even if it meant risking everything. Neither option sounded particularly appealing. But as I stared out at the city skyline, I knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. For Margaret, for Hawthorne Enterprises, and maybe for myself. I met Marcus again 2 nights later, this time in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of Brooklyn. The kind of place where no one asks questions and the coffee tastes like regret. He slid into the booth across from me, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. You look like hell, he said, raising an eyebrow. Thanks, I muttered, sipping my lukewarm coffee. So do you? He chuckled dryly, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. Listen, Elliot, if we're going to pull this off, we need to move fast. Every day we wait, Victoria gets closer to uncovering something she shouldn't. And trust me, you don't want that. I narrowed my eyes. Why are you helping me? What's in it for you? For a moment, Marcus didn't answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Margaret saved my life once. She gave me a second chance when no one else would. This is me repaying the favor. His words caught me off guard. Margaret had always been generous with her favors, but she was also ruthless when crossed. Whatever debt Marcus owed her must have been significant. All right, I said finally, what's the plan? Over the next few days, Marcus and I worked tirelessly to piece together the fragments of Margaret's investigation. Project Phoenix turned out to be a code name for a massive cover-up involving several high-profile politicians, corporate executives, and even members of the Hawthorne family themselves. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became that Margaret hadn't died because of incompetence or bad luck. Someone powerful had silenced her, and they weren't about to let us expose the truth. Meanwhile, Victoria's paranoia reached new heights. She hired private investigators to track down leaks within the company, doubling security protocols and monitoring employee communications. Rumors spread that she suspected internal sabotage, though whether she suspected me specifically remained unclear. Asterisk. One evening, as I reviewed the latest batch of decrypted files, I stumbled upon something chilling. A memo dated just days before Margaret's death. It contained a list of names, including mine, and cryptic notes about potential liabilities. My blood ran cold. Whoever had orchestrated Margaret's murder wasn't just targeting her. They were cleaning house. And if I wasn't careful, I'd be next. It happened during a board meeting, or rather, what was left of one. Attendance had dwindled drastically since Victoria took over, leaving only a handful of loyalists and desperate opportunists clinging to their positions. The atmosphere was tense, every word spoken laced with suspicion. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her usual confidence replaced by thinly veiled desperation. "We can fix this," she insisted, addressing the remaining executives. "But we need transparency. No more secrets." As she spoke, I couldn't help but notice the way her hands trembled slightly, betraying her outward composure. For all her bravado, she was scared, and rightfully so. When the meeting adjourned, I lingered behind, waiting until everyone else had left. Then I approached her, closing the door softly behind me. "We need to talk," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. She turned to face me, her eyes flashing with defiance. "What do you want, Elliot?" "To help you," I replied, "but first you need to listen." For a moment, she hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. I laid it all out for her. The tamper reports, the sabotage, the encrypted files, and finally, the memo listing her mother's potential liabilities. Her face went pale as I spoke, her knuckles white against the edge of the conference table. This can't be real," she whispered, shaking her head. "My father wouldn't." "Your father isn't the only one involved," I interrupted gently. "Whoever did this has connections everywhere, and they're still watching." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, straightening her posture. "What do we do now?" "We fight back," I said firmly, "but not alone. We need allies, people who won't sell us out the second things get tough." She looked at me, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." As we shook hands, sealing our fragile alliance, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the weight of this burden alone. But deep down, I knew the hardest battles were yet to come. Over the following weeks, Victoria and I worked side by side, unraveling the tangled web of lies surrounding her family's empire. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old resentments flared, when mistrust threatened to derail everything we built, but somehow we persevered. Employees began noticing the change. Meetings became collaborative instead of combative. Decisions were made based on merit rather than ego. Slowly but surely, the company started finding its footing again. Still, the shadow of Margaret's death loomed large. Every breakthrough brought us closer to the truth, and closer to danger. One night, as we pored over documents in my apartment, Victoria looked up at me, her expression haunted. "What happens when we find whoever did this?" she asked quietly. "We make them pay," I replied without hesitation. But as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that justice might come at a cost neither of us was prepared to bear. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during a late-night stakeout at a luxury penthouse downtown. Marcus had traced a series of suspicious transactions to a man named Charles Whitaker, a close family friend and longtime confidant of Hawthorne's. When we confronted him, Whitaker didn't deny his involvement. Instead, he smirked, leaning back in his chair as if he held all the cards. "You think exposing me will change anything?" he sneered. "The system is rotten to its core." Margaret knew too much. She had to go. Rage boiled inside me, but Victoria stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "You killed my mother," she said, her words cutting like a blade. "And now, the world will know what you've done." Whitaker laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Good luck with that. But luck wasn't on his side anymore. Within days, the evidence we gathered against Whitaker made headlines worldwide. His arrest sent shockwaves through the business community, implicating dozens of powerful figures in a sprawling corruption scandal. The Hawthorne name, once synonymous with greed and deceit, began to recover under Victoria's leadership. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope for the company, for Victoria, and maybe even for myself. But as the dust settled, I realized my role in this saga was coming to an end. One evening, as Victoria and I stood on the rooftop of Hawthorne Tower, overlooking the city lights, she turned to me with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Elliot, for everything." I nodded, returning the gesture. "It's your turn now. Take care of this place." The next morning, I submitted my resignation letter. Victoria tried to talk me out of it, but I insisted. Someone fresh needs to lead this company into the future. I told her, not someone tied to its past. As I walked out of the building for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of secrets, guilt, and revenge no longer anchor me to the ground. Whatever lay ahead, I was ready to face it. Because sometimes letting go is the hardest and most rewarding thing you can do. It was a crisp autumn morning when I stepped into Hawthorne Tower one last time. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the streets were alive with the hum of New York City. Horns blaring, footsteps echoing, life moving forward as it always did. But for me, this wasn't just another day. It was an ending. Victoria had insisted on hosting a small farewell gathering in the executive lounge, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd been through together. As I entered the room, I saw familiar faces. Colleagues who'd once distrusted me, now nodding in respect. Employees whose lives I'd unknowingly impacted, offering heartfelt thanks. Even Marcus showed up, standing quietly in the corner with a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Elliot," Victoria said, stepping forward to shake my hand. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You didn't have to leave like this." "Yes, I did," I replied softly. "This company deserves someone untainted by its past. Someone like you." She opened her mouth to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, she pulled me into an unexpected hug. For a moment, I let myself linger there, feeling the warmth of closure wash over me. When the party ended, I packed the last of my belongings into a single box and made my way to the elevator. As the door slid shut, I glanced back at the office one final time. Then, with a deep breath, I turned away. For weeks after leaving Hawthorne Enterprises, I wandered aimlessly. Not physically. I stayed in my penthouse, watching the city from my window, but emotionally. The adrenaline rush of revenge, the weight of secrets, the thrill of uncovering the truth, it was all gone now. And while freedom felt liberating, it also left a void. One evening, I found myself sorting through old photos and mementos from Margaret's era. There was one picture in particular that caught my eye. Margaret and me, standing on the rooftop of the tower, laughing like two people who believed they could conquer the world. Back then, I'd been so sure of myself, so convinced that loyalty meant doing whatever it took to protect the company. But now I realized how much I'd lost along the way. My integrity, my peace of mind, maybe even pieces of my soul. As I stared at the photo, something shifted inside me. Guilt wouldn't bring Margaret back, and regret wouldn't change the choices I'd made. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to honor her legacy without repeating her mistakes. A month later, I received a letter from Victoria. Inside was a simple note. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Hawthorne Enterprises is stronger because of you. Attached was a check for a substantial sum, my severance package, though I hadn't expected anything close to this amount. Instead of depositing it, I called Victoria. What's this for? I asked, my tone teasing but curious. It's seed money, she replied matter-of-factly. Start something new, something good. Her words struck a chord. For years, I'd been part of a system built on greed and corruption. What if, instead of running from my past, I used what I'd learned to create something better? That night, I began drafting plans for a nonprofit organization aimed at supporting whistleblowers and exposing corporate wrongdoing. I named it Phoenix Initiative, a nod to Margaret's unfinished work and the idea that even ashes can give rise to something beautiful. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in front of a crowd of journalists, activists, and survivors of corporate scandals. The Phoenix Initiative had officially launched, and already we were making waves. Dozens of cases had come to light thanks to our efforts, holding powerful figures accountable and giving voice to those who'd been silenced. As I delivered my opening remarks, I couldn't help but think about Margaret. Would she approve of what I'd done, of the man I'd become? Change doesn't happen overnight, I said, addressing the audience. But it starts with courage, with honesty, with the willingness to confront the shadows instead of hiding from them. After the event, Victoria approached me, her face glowing with pride. You've done incredible things, Elliot. She'd be proud of you. I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. Yeah, I said quietly. Maybe she would. As we parted ways, I walked out into the cool night air, looking up at the stars. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But for once, I was okay with that. Because sometimes, endings aren't really endings. Sometimes, they're just the beginning of something greater.